Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I'm here with the author of a absolutely staggering work of film analysis and memoir and so many interesting things. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, I'm Tilly Bridges, and my book is Begin Transmission, The Trans Allegories of the Matrix, and it's exactly what it says on the tin.
It was a pleasure to read, and it made me think about one of my favorite movie series in an not entirely new way, but with a lot more clarity, perhaps, than I ever had. But before we get into it too much, I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about your journey to this book, because I was very interested by the fact that it started or it was imagined as a tweet thread, and it turned into so much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an accidental book. Oops, I wrote a book. I didn't mean to. When I came out publicly as a trans woman in the summer of 2020, I realized that I still had a lot of privilege. I'm very, very white, and among trans people, there's a whole lot of us lose friends, family, homes, jobs, and I didn't lose any of that. And so I have so much less to deal with than so many other trans people do. And so I thought that I wanted to do something to use my privilege to help if I could. And I'm a writer, a screenwriter. And so I thought maybe I could write something. And so I started writing weekly essays that started as Twitter threads that I called Trans Tuesday. And it was around that time, or not too long after, that the Wachowskis said they'd come out publicly to say that they intended the movies to be trans allegories. And I was already writing about trans issues, and everyone knew I was a screenwriter. And so I kept getting asked, what does this mean? What does this mean? What are they talking about? What are they saying? And I got asked so many times, and I was so tired of it. I thought, okay, I'm going to finally do an essay on it so people can stop asking me, and I'll have something I can point them to. And I was always a fan of the movies. I always really loved them. I connected with them on a level I didn't understand, but I do now. But when I sat down, I thought it was going to be one essay. And I found that they were so incredibly layered and specific and deep to the trans experience that there was so much to tell people about. And so that became 24 essays across the entire franchise. And then when I finished that, there was enough to recompile them and expand on them in a book.
It's amazing that from those tiny, not tiny, but from those origins, this huge book came from that. And in terms of how I had seen these movies, the only sort of aspect that I had heard discussed was the character switch. And so to read that it is embedded in every single aspect of the filmmaking of this movie it's amazing. I'm really interested in the structure of the book. This might seem like a little bit of a non sequitur, but before I was a librarian, I was a medieval historian. And when I opened this book, I was like, oh my gosh, this looks like a sort of annotated medieval text, and the level of detail analysis and the thoughtful nuanced discussion of a text and a really close reading just reminded me of ages old systems of analysis and reading and stuff like that. And it was really
that's very cool. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, and to see that applied to a film series was so cool. So could you talk a little bit about how you landed on the structure? Because each film discussion starts with a sort of capsule introduction, and then you use timestamps to discuss the real nitty gritty of what you're seeing on the screen. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So that wasn't my intent when I started, because I thought, again, that it would just be one essay and I would talk in broad strokes about, they briefly touch on these 2 or 3 things that are kind of similar to trans existence. But when I sat down to rewatch and take notes, I had to keep pausing it every 10 to 15 seconds to take more notes or look up things or write down questions, because there was so much in there. They're so densely packed with information and feeling and emotion about trans life. And it made me feel so incredibly seen and understood in a way that like so little media does, because there's so little representation for trans folks, especially good representation. And so I wanted to be sure that I could get that across to other trans people out there to understand how very, very seen they could be. And, you know, the movies also have a lot to say about cis people and allyship and how to be a good ally and why it's so vital for our survival. And so I wanted to be sure that came through too. And really the only way to do it, I found, was to put in the timestamps of what I was talking about, because a lot of the allegories are conveyed very visually. You need to, I suggest in the book that you watch it on the a screen as you're reading and pause it at the timestamps and really look what's on screen, because the allegories are so visual. And if you look at what they're showing you and what they're not showing you and where the characters are in relation to each other and what's going on at the time, you learn so much, because again, I'm in absolute awe as a writer of how densely packed these allegories are and how much they worked in. And it was really the only way that I could find to convey to everybody who was reading exactly what you were seeing and what is in there, what's in those images you're seeing, what's behind them, what's underneath them.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that, like, in a way, you know, like, because I did a lot of that. I read it and had the films going in the background when I could, and
Yeah.
it occurred to me that, like, it's not only like a really persuasive expression of like this particular allegory, but it's also almost like a sort of film analysis 101. Like, it really teaches you how to do close reading, you know. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that was intentional too, and if maybe that comes from like your role as a writer and creator of media yourself.
Yeah, I think that's part of what allowed me to be able to see it and talk about it, as well as I hope I was able to, because being a screenwriter, you know, I've built scripts like this from the ground up, and so whenever we watch anything, read anything, I'm always dissecting it. I'm trying to learn from it, learn what I can. Why was this done? Why was that done? What does this mean? And you know, I'm always trying to become a better writer, and so I think that's probably part of it, is that I can kind of, to be a little cliche, see the code behind the matrix in it. But you know, everything is done with intent in a movie or a TV show or even, you know, novels. The writers have an intent behind the things they do. Things aren't just an accident. And so once you start examining why things are the way they are from a writing standpoint, you can uncover a whole lot of information. And honestly, it made me a little mad as a writer, because it's so good, and I don't think I could ever be that good. It's quite awe-inspiring to me.
It absolutely is awe-inspiring. It's the way that, you know, everything works together, because you talk a lot about color, and there's some
Yeah.
really powerful use of color that I'd love for you to talk about too. But then you also talk about performance, you know, and composition, and it's just like I do think, like, a lot of times it's easy to fall into thinking like, oh, you know, a lot of this is subconscious or was not intended, but is like something that, like, when we read, we are discovering, like, for the writers themselves, you know, but like to show the
Yeah.
really intense intentionality is just like really, really fascinating. Can you talk a little bit, yeah, about the way that color works in these? Because I think that, like, you know, people's memories of the films are so color driven, at least it is for me, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole color theory that I developed for it came about from the first movie. But of course, you know, there's the red pill and the blue pill, which is a very pivotal scene. And that's what establishes those two colors and their meanings for the entire franchise. But I noticed when I was rewatching, knowing that scene was coming, and I was like, okay, so red and blue are really important there. Let's see if they show up anywhere else. And they do, but very sparingly and only in very certain circumstances. And so I started to think that there must have been some kind of intent behind that. And so when you reinterpret the red pill, blue pill scene through that lens, what you get is that the red pill is, it stands for truth, right? Because like at the time these movies came out, like hormone replacement therapy pills for women were red. That was estrogen, right? And that's what the Wachowskis, maybe, we don't know their transition timeline. That's none of our business, but they would have been aware of it. And that's where it came from. That's the moment Neo chooses to transition. And so red holding as truth through the entire franchise, through all 4 movies and the Animatrix. It never changes, it never wavers. And blue is always doubt, although there are different kinds of doubt that we all experience, and some are good and some are bad. And then yellow is always fear. And they use combinations of those colors to convey even more complex things. So if you see something that's purple, there is doubt, but there is also truth, possibly in conflict, possibly in concert, depending on the context. The green overcast of the original trilogy, every time they're in the Matrix, shows you that that world is built in fear and doubt about trans existence. So they use it so specifically, like once you know, you can't not see it every time you watch, and you're like, it's so intentional, their use and where they put it and where they don't. And it's just, it's fascinating. That's one of the things that like blows my mind as a writer. I'm like, I don't know if I could ever think of something like that. It's so good.
Yeah, me too. It's just like, oh my gosh, it's absolutely impressive. And it is then so exciting just to, even when you are just open the book, like you feel like you're being given a key that unlocks like the meaning of these films in such a powerful way. And one of the things that impressed me the most is that it really this book sort of like really to me demonstrates like the weakness of the sort of like traditional chosen one hero's journey movie, because like if it were that like hero's journey chosen one narrative, like the end of the first movie would be the end of the story. And not, it's the beginning. And like you say that in the book, and even Neo says that in the film, and it just opens up the world so much more, and it makes the sequels, I think, mean a lot more too. I'm wondering, like, how many times did you have to watch these films in the course of writing this? Did you read like interviews and other books and stuff like that?
I didn't do any outside reading or interviews or anything like that, because I wanted to approach the films just as they are, as the pieces of art they were created as. But I had to watch them a lot. The most intensive part of the process was the first watch through of each of them when I began taking notes for them, because it was basically like 8 to 10 hour process. And that's watching the same movie, not watching it over and over and over again, but like one watch through over the span of 10 hours. Because after I paused it, I would have to do some research, or I would have to jot down questions and notes and try to figure out what I was seeing so that I could formulate my thoughts for the next scene. So it was a very long process. I think I broke each of them over 2 days. So I did like 4 to 5 hours a day for half a movie. And then, of course, I had to go back later and look things up again as I was revising them. I was like, wait a minute, maybe I missed something here. I need to go back and check that. And so I was spot checking things forever. So I don't even know the total number of times that I've seen them now, but it is a very high number.
Wow. Yeah, and it's another thing, like as a medievalist, is that like when you're doing analysis, you do often end up reading the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Sort of like, did you find that process like changed your relationship to the films?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have this problem now where I can't see them outside of the allegories, and I don't really want to, because like, again, nothing speaks so specifically to trans existence as these movies do, and I've never felt that from anything. So now I have people, who've read the book or just know about it, and they come up and they're like, well, why do you think there's a machine city in that sci-fi story? I don't understand. And I'm like, I don't know, but I don't care. Because I'm so into the allegory part of it that's all I really care about, because it means so much to me. So like the surface sci-fi story is great and I like it a lot, but I'm totally uninterested in diving into the specifics of that world. Just give me allegory.
Absolutely. And I think that like, now even just like thinking about how I have experienced the movies as I've watched them, like the movies do have a sort of like dreamlike quality to them. And that's something that Neo even says like very early in them. And I think that is like what privileging the allegory does, like it lets you sort of play in a sort of expansive reality, and I think it's really cool how that happens here.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. They are very dreamlike in that way, because like what I've found is that everything is in service of the allegories first. So there are like a few things in the surface sci-fi story. When I first saw them, I'm like, well, I don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense to me. But within the allegory, it makes absolute, perfect, beautiful sense. And so I don't care that it doesn't maybe make logical sense in the surface story. Like the best example is in the first movie where Trinity kisses Neo back to life. And you're like, well, how do you kiss somebody back? But within the allegory, it's such a pivotal and important moment, and it means something so deep and profound. So I'm okay with her kissing him back to life. Great, go for it, because it means so much in the other way you examine it. So
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, you can talk about like plot logic and narrative logic and all those things. And that's, that can be an interesting thing to do. But like allegory does have its own logic, just the way that like dreams do. And even the way, gosh, I don't know. It's just like, I think it opens up so much more to sort of like put the plot aside and to look at sort of like these more almost archetypal collective meanings, in things. Because like when you said the kissing back to life part, I was like, oh yeah, that's almost like fairy tale logic too, and so some of these like really dealing with like deep meaning.
Yeah, well, like the important thing to remember is that movies are stories, just like books and television, and stories are about feeling. They're about emotion. They're about what they make you feel. How do you feel when you experience this? Why do you feel this? Why do the creators want you to feel this now? What are they trying to tell you? And so for me, like everything I watch, I'm always much more interested in the emotion behind it, in the feeling behind it, in what the characters are learning and growing or not learning and growing from. It's much more about a feel than it is, for me anyway, than it is about like, the empirical, where did the first act end and where did the second act end, and did the first act start or end too late or whatever. I'm like, yeah, okay, but if the emotional core was great, that's all I really care about.
I agree. Yeah. And I think that like, all that like I almost want to call it like the story breakdown of identifying parts and how long different sections should be, and where you want your story to go. Like that can make stories feel a little like machine-like, which I guess ironic, sort of talking about like the themes we're talking about. But and I think that it's I don't know, letting stories be more human and messy is kind of produces more things.
Exactly. Like the mechanics are important and you need to know them, but the mechanics should be in service of the character and the story and the heart of what you're getting at.
Yes, that's super cool, because I think that like speaks to in some ways, like knowing rules so that you can intelligently break them,
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the things that I found so powerful about your reading of the movies, actually, to link that in, is sort of like when you look at the Agent Smith character through this allegorical lens. What I see so much there is like the resentment of like the rule follower towards like the rule breaker, and so I love that the movie like also plays with rules and breaks them and things like that. It's all so cohesive.
Yeah, it really is. And that's a sort of a saying that goes around like in Hollywood and in screenwriting, is that you have to know the rules before you can break them. So you need to, start with structure, learn how act breaks work, learn how to, craft a character arc through a story. But once you do that, those are tools to be used to best convey the story you have to tell.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a pleasure to read this book and to speak with you about it. Do you have anything else in the works right now? I know you work on some writing projects and shows and things like that, but what's in the future for you?
Well, my wife and I, for our screenwriting, we write as a team. We worked on season 2 of the animated Monster High show. It's still airing season 1 episodes, so our episodes probably won't be out on that till 2024. We have a few other graphic novel projects, some gaming writing that we're doing in the meantime. All of the screenwriting is sort of on a halt, with the WGA strike right now. So, but we've got those other things coming, so you can look forward to those. And if folks out there are interested in the essays, I still write weekly essays about trans life and existence and chronicling my transition and all of that. And they're all free. There's over 100 of them. And I post them every week at tilliestrans tuesdays.com.
Thank you so much. Um, yeah, those projects all sound super cool. And if you ever want to come back to the show and talk about any of them, our door's always open. And yeah,
I would love to. This has been wonderful.
well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a
Thank you.
listeners, please pick up Begin Transmission, The Trans Allegories of the Matrix. You will absolutely love this book. It is just a really rewarding way to experience a movie that I hope you know and love. Thank you so much for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.